But we're going to jump to our next storyteller, who's Chris Bouchard. I'll start introducing her. Christina Bouchard teaches Ascendant Perspectives and Multi-Level Governance at the University of Ottawa. Her research centers around how governments manage land, plan infrastructure, and how the instruments of Canada's planning regimes enable or constrain democracy. She holds a master's degree in public administration from Dalhousie University, and prior to becoming an academic, she was a planner and actually managed cycling infrastructure projects in the public and private sectors. And Chris is going to share the story of bikes and exportation from the unbuilt to net zero land use. Over to you, Chris.
So thanks so much for coming out. You know, I was fortunate enough to get to do this once before, right, before the pandemic down at the mill. And at that time, I remember I was really thinking about how it was that our built environment comes together. The series of standards and decision-making that leads to the outcomes on our streets, whether we get bike lanes or not, whether we get sidewalks. And you know, this time I'd like to go in a little bit of a different direction with it, because I care very much about that subject. I'm very passionate about it. But I have to say I'm almost equally passionate about the unbuilt spaces, the in-between spaces. Who here, you know, in your cycling, who does sort of adventure riding in between cities, right? Commuting, but also a little bit, of course, right? Adventure riding is the best. It's amazing. And you know, what I've come to understand is that, especially now, these unbuilt spaces are equally a product of policies, of decision making, of things that accumulate over time to actually let things be and let natural systems persist untouched by man. Whether we intervene or minimally intervene, or in the cases of greenbelts, for example, if we put a designation on them to have them used exclusively for agriculture, for example. These types of decisions are reflective of values as well. So I love cycling for transportation. It's a choice that you can make that takes you out of the boxes that we typically inhabit, our cubicle boxes that we inhabit, our home boxes that we inhabit, you know, LRT boxes, car boxes. We're in these boxes all the time. And what's really, I have found, to be very special about cycling is that when you cycle, you're immersed. You're immersed in the weather, you're immersed in the climate, you're immersed in the seasons, especially if you're a year-round cyclist. And you're really immersed in the natural world. And it fundamentally changes your disposition towards the environment around you, doesn't it? It's not something to be taken for granted, because there's so many things in place these days that seek to separate us from the natural world, that seek to keep us from being able to feel that connection. Just as one example, I was fortunate enough to get to know the fellow here at the City of Ottawa who's working on updating the Green Space Master Plan. And he's a very smart guy. He was giving me some examples of all the things that he wanted to address in this older vision of managing green space. He was saying, these recommendations, Chris, you know, they want to restrict access points, prevent walking off trails, closing unsanctioned trails, restricting dog walking, no off-leash dogs, removing summer forts constructed by children, and of course, paramount, prohibiting biking except on very designated places, right? We've all felt it. And what does it mean? It's really they're trying to, through this regime of control, trying to hold people back from doing all of these natural activities that they really want to do, to be able to connect with the green space, to be able to connect with the physical, natural environment around them. And you know, I have to say, I want to get a little philosophical about it. There's something to that. There's a danger to it. There really is, because it reinforces a paradigm where man's separate from nature. This is, in the Western world, a very fundamental thing we have in our philosophy here, but it's not like that all around the world. Other countries around the world, and even our First Nations here in North America, they fundamentally see people as much more connected to the physical world around them. And so I think that there's a real danger when we become over-invested in these systems that seek to separate us from physical spaces, from green spaces. Because if we do that, then our connection to the natural world, it becomes uniquely an economic one, where what we seek is we seek dominion. We seek to use natural spaces just to build things. And we don't understand how the physical environment really helps us and gets inside us. But the more forests and farms and wetlands are being paved to make way for suburban junkscapes, the more opportunities have emerged for something else. And so I'm quite fortunate in my work to have now connected with some really great academics who are coming to understand some of the things they're doing over in the EU. And in France in particular, they have something called Zéro Artificialisation Net, which we would translate in English to be zero net land use. So it's a fundamental paradigm shift in understanding green space, in understanding planning, and more towards the net carbon neutrality type of thinking of, you set a bar, you're allowed to have this much artificialized space and this much natural space, as opposed to our ever-expanding urban boundaries that we have here, going on and on and on in perpetuity in North America. So the tie-in that I'm making here with cycling is that cycling, at least in my case, has enabled a really type of different immersion into the natural world where you become a part of the natural system instead of having supremacy and dominion over it. You can feel how you exist in the space and how you exist in history. When you cycle between small towns, off the highways, away from the parking lots, what do we find? What do you guys find? I find old mills, I find old canals, old schoolhouses, rail lines, all of these vestigial pieces that were built well before our current system of automobility that really touches everything. And it took an incredible ambition to build these things that are now infrastructure relics of an age gone by. They were once towering accomplishments. Their bones continue to lie scattered around the small towns that we get to discover when we explore on our bikes. But to see them, you have to leave the highways. You even have to leave the main roads in order to find them. You have to step away from the overarching and very consuming systems that are present everywhere. And this is what I find so valuable about cycling. It allows you to take a step back and perceive the quieter worlds that are so much more than just unbuilt, if we're adventurous enough to